Welcome to the Gender in Focus podcast. I'm Elle, and each week I get to ask Kai Scott, the president of Transfocus Consulting, all the questions you have ever wanted to ask about trans and non-binary people in the workplace and in the wider world.
Gender diversity has always existed. It's just more or less visible at given times. And we know this through looking the history of Indigenous peoples here on Turtle Island. And there, too, we have long traditions. They were people that had places and roles and responsibilities and were kind of factored into everyday life.
The beauty standards that we have are so, focused heavily on cis people. They're also focused heavily on white people. They're also so heavily focused on, X, Y, and Z type of person that you should all aspire to be. And if you're not that, then therefore you're not beautiful. It's just such nonsense. And I think we could all do with letting that go a little bit.
Welcome to today's episode, where we're diving headfirst into some of the most common and most confidently held misconceptions about trans and non-binary people. Perhaps you've heard them, something like, it's a new thing, or I can tell who's trans just by looking at them. Others go a bit deeper. It's a mental illness. Trans people don't know who they are, but somehow others do. We'll unpack the persistent myths that trans people must pass, the casual violations of privacy, and why they them is, and always has been, a solid grammar. We'll also take on the stereotypes baked into beauty standards and strength and ability, the idea that trans women can't be beautiful or that trans men can't excel in things like sports. In this episode, we'll not just debunk myths, we're opening up space for clarity, nuance, and more grounded understanding of gender than the headlines ever offer. Let's get into it. I'm really excited to talk about this with my coworker, Elle. How are you doing today?
I'm doing so well, thank you, Kai. How are you?
Excellent. I'm also doing well. Yeah. And really interested in this topic because it comes up quite a bit.
It does come up quite a bit. As somebody who does the social media for Transfocus, the misconceptions come firing at me in the comments section nearly every day. So I'm pretty interested in this topic. And there are so many misconceptions. So I don't think we'll even get to cover all of them today. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 because there are so many. And the one that I kind of wanted to start with, if that's all right with you, is the one that you mentioned in your intro just then, which was that it's a new thing, that this is just like trans people have just suddenly in 2012 popped up and started existing. So that's a misconception I would love you to talk about first.
Yeah, that's a good one. And it's almost like Laverne Cox on Times Magazine, or I can't remember if it was Times or some other magazine. That was the moment that trans people started to exist. She brought them forth. And certainly I appreciate that for many, gender diversity is a relatively new topic. And it's okay for something to be new to someone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is new entirely. So that's a distinction but that people can own if it's new to them. That's okay. And they want to learn more and dive into it and whatnot. But that just because something is new to someone then also means that it's never existed before is quite a leap. So and so what has happened, though, which is quite sad and difficult kind of history for us to realize, is that unfortunately it has not been safe. And even to present, it can not be safe for people to be trans and non-binary. So people have had the very difficult calculus of like, do I share this with people or do I not? And for a long time, people did not because it would cost too much. And it did cost a lot for those who did come forth and share more. Open ridicule, losing jobs, losing family. People can look at that long list and understandably be afraid of taking that step of coming out of the shadows or coming out of the closet as themselves. And so gender diversity has always existed. It's just more or less visible at given times. And we know this through looking the history of Indigenous peoples here on Turtle Island. And there too, we have long traditions which were interrupted by colonization or destroyed, very sadly. But there were people
Mhm.
that had places and roles and responsibilities and were kind of factored into everyday life, or even in kind of deeper way into ceremony, and perhaps in some settings, shamanistic healing. So, and we know this around the world too, and we could have so many more examples that I could share. Every country, every tradition has some place, even if it's perhaps hidden or driven
Mhm.
underground by various forces.
And on that, then, there is sort of combined with the idea that it's a new thing, is also that it's a sort of fad, or
Mm.
people are going through a phase, or um, yeah, that kind of icky.
Oh
No,
yeah,
what word can I use?
I
That
know.
kind of sort of rhetoric around that.
Mhm.
Could you go into that too?
Yeah. That's an understandable response because it doesn't feel great. At least not for me when I hear that.
Hmm.
Even if people don't intend for it, it often has a dismissive
Yeah.
attitude with it. It's not just that people are saying it. It's like, well, that can't be the case because
Mm.
you're just following everybody else. Um, and there's a few different things that are baked into it, even if people don't realize what they're saying. Usually, it is somehow there's a follow up piece too, where people might point to where the fad is existing. And oftentimes people say, oh, it's online, right?
Right.
And the type of social media that somebody is consuming, or, what's happening in school and what kids are talking about. This is often stated for youth in particular, but
Hmm.
it also is something that people say towards adults. And it often is really harmful because this is something that somebody wants to share. And then to have this type of response in return, that can really shut things down. Where they may have gone online, but that's where they found community and a place where they started to piece together their own, what they've seen and felt within themselves for so long but had no language for and
Yeah.
no point of reference, right? They just know that something's off. They know it's related to their gender. It's scary to even go there. But when there's places like online communities where people can think that through, it's not coming from nowhere. It's
Hmm.
something that's already inside, but then better understood in communion with others. And so these are some of the dynamics at play. And whether or not there was a community, people would still be wrestling with it and or still
Hmm.
coming to terms. But just harder for folks to do
Hmm.
that. And so the
Right.
it's a fad is largely not indicative of what's actually happening. It's people are realizing very deep truths about themselves and wanting to
Hmm.
share that with others. And unfortunately, this type of response can be quite harmful.
Mhm. You mentioned trans youth, and I kind
Mm,
of think that that is paired so closely with it's a fad. So more on an individual basis, sometimes people see, especially a young person coming out or
mm,
thinking about their gender in some way, and it being treated like, oh, they're just going through a phase, or how can they be sure? And sometimes people have to struggle with their sort of caregivers or family or
mm,
friends or whatever for quite a long time before they're taken seriously. And it's like, how long
yeah.
does someone have to struggle before you believe who they are?
Yeah. 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 It's such a good point that people may not realize they're kind of holding out, taking somebody's identity seriously
Hmm.
for years, years upon years, sometimes. And oftentimes, cisgender people don't have their gender question. They do
Yeah.
sometimes, right? Because there are
Hmm.
differences between gender expression and gender identity. But I think it's kind of on speed with trans and non-binary folks, particularly youth, where if you have a caregiver who may not fully understand what it means to be
Hmm.
trans and non-binary, will just discount it forever and a day. And while the youth is trying to kind of live their lives, and that family connection is super important, even if
Hmm.
caregivers don't fully understand it, that's okay. That's not what's being expected of you. But it's more that you're able to connect with the youth, to like be like, tell me more, like if you want
Mhm.
to, like what's this, what does it feel like, what are your experiences, not necessarily how do you know, because that comes from a like almost interrogation style
Yeah.
approach, like, prove to me that you are. It's more like being curious and being open. And yeah, I can appreciate, especially for caregivers, there is fear there, right? Because there's quite a
Mhm.
bit of mistreatment of trans and non-binary folks, and we don't wish mistreatment on our family members and almost want to protect them from it. It feels
Yeah.
almost easier to dissuade a child from what's innermost about them, their
Mhm.
identity, rather than figuring out how to, make the world a better place, right? But I very much invite folks um, to kind of steer clear of that type of approach, because that will shut down, most likely, um, trans and non-binary youth, and they won't want to talk about things
Mhm.
if that's the approach, versus an open door can reveal a lot more along the way. And so, yeah, so those are some of the thoughts I have. I don't know if you have any to add into the mix, but those are, yeah, it's
No,
really
only
important.
that it is, and only that there's, I can't remember the stats exactly, but there are really scary statistics that
Mm.
show about how having no, it's hang on, wait, I've confused myself. You're the stats person.
I think you're referring to the stats that are positive when
Yes.
there's a supportive
It's
adult.
even like one, even
Yeah,
one
yeah,
supportive adult in your life will completely flip the statistics in terms of um, depression and suicide rates amongst
mhm,
trans youth. So
yeah.
yeah, you're right. That's what I meant. That
Well,
it's
yeah,
good, not
the
not
contrast
scary.
between the two, it's like supportive
Hmm.
versus not supportive adult. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a parent, right? It can be, or
Right.
a caregiver. It's any adult. It could be a teacher, it could be a coach.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's kind of 4 times more likely to have good or excellent mental health outcomes. Like 4 times,
Yeah.
just being there and being open and thoughtful. And yeah, that seems like pretty small lift for such a benefit, right?
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. I think that's like on the fear of people hearing trans youth talk about their gender and worrying about the outcomes, and actually, yeah, by giving that support, it's almost counterintuitive, but by giving that support and believing them when they
Mhm.
talk about it, or just showing some kind of interest in it,
Yeah,
or curiosity, that you're way more likely to see those positive outcomes. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Tip
and
the balance.
mhm. And that sort of slides into another misconception that you mentioned in the introduction, which is when people are saying that they're trans and other people are saying, no, you're not. There is this kind of arrogance around,
Mm,
like, no, I see that you are this gender. You saying that you are a different gender is not right, because I know this about you. It's
right.
such an arrogant perspective.
Yeah.
And yeah, I wondered if you could go into that.
Yeah. And it's like kind of baffling when we either read about it or personally experience it. It's like,
Hmm.
especially given that many trans and non-binary folks take years, maybe not everyone, some people are perhaps more, able to click into it and realize it quicker. um, but I'll speak for myself, it took a long time to piece it together, given how much in society is taught about you basically are what you're born and that's it, end of
Hmm.
story. And it's like, even though there's a lot more inside that speaks against that or in a different way. And so when people kind of say, no, you're this, and after having to spend a lot of years, struggling and, processing and looking for information, and like this does not come lightly or easily or quickly, for
Hmm.
many. And so just to have somebody be like, nah, it's like, okay,
Right.
wow,
Yeah.
you don't know what it's like to be me, or another trans or non-binary person. And there's kind of a lack of humility around, or even like a curiosity to be like, oh, maybe I
Mhm.
missed something. I don't quite understand or have a hard time imagining what that would be like. But let me try to, at least look at it, right? But
Mhm.
sometimes there's just like a kind of a shut door approach where it's like, no, you're this, and you're just gonna like keep you in that box. And
Mhm.
yeah, anything else to the contrary, I'm gonna dismiss, and it's not accounted for. Like, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It's an
very
odd
baffling.
approach.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's an odd way to go through life, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I would encourage folks who either they're personally in that place or they have people in their lives who are in those places, is just to have them think about something that other people don't understand about them, and then how quickly there's perhaps an opportunity for a compassion bridge to
Mhm.
see, okay, what does it feel like when people discount or deny or dismiss what I'm sharing with them, right? It doesn't have to be about gender. Any other topic where there's been deep reflection and coming to terms with something, some aspect of oneself. Maybe it's about a different way of learning, like just something where others have dismissed that,
Mhm.
and the difficulty that comes from that kind of thing. We all, I think, have some or one or two of those examples that we can draw and realize, oh yeah, I could see why trans and non-binary folks might be upset by that type of
Yeah.
discourse. Yeah.
With that kind of dismissal of trans and non-binary people's experiences comes another misconception that is just it's a mental illness. You're not well and you need to go and get help somewhere and then you'll be
Mhm.
back to normal. And that's in air quotes, by the way, for people who are listening. And you'll be back to normal and back to, the way things should be. And there's almost like, to me, it feels like a clinging on of like,
Mm,
no, my understanding of the world is being disrupted. So I'll just dismiss that as a mental illness. And so, yeah, I
yeah.
wondered if you could give some insight there
Hmm.
too.
Yeah. It's almost like an easy way out, even
Mm.
though it's not easy for the trans or non-binary
No,
person to
for
read
sure.
or see that, but easy for that person if there's a cognitive dissonance. It's like a quick thing to go to mental illness, and certainly, in the past it has been treated as such, so it's not even a big reach, right?
Right. Yeah.
Society is so primed to think of other as like bad or pathological or in some way not normal, and therefore to try to redirect somebody. Very common in parallels with addiction as well, right? People are like, well, this
Hmm.
is just something you have to handle. You have this, but you need to be kind of deprogrammed or redirected out of this kind of,
Right.
in their minds, behavior, right? Versus like
Right.
something that
Just
someone
being.
is, right? It's a
Yeah.
very different approach. And so, yeah, the mental illness one comes up a lot, particularly in social media discourse,
Hmm.
people misunderstanding it as a mental illness versus understanding that this is a normal part of human diversity in general. It's just people have a different, inner understanding of themselves compared to what they were assigned at birth or thought to be at birth based on their bodies, and that our bodies are not the final say necessarily, and more to the story with all kinds of other factors, right? So
Hmm.
the mental illness is for me a bit um, incomplete. It's
Lazy.
not incomplete because it's
Oh.
not true, but just um, it's too easy, too quick,
Hmm.
and doesn't give a view to the richness that exists there if people are willing to look.
Hmm. It feels quite lazy to me, that reach to mental illness, and I think that extends beyond just um, people saying it's a mental illness, but like when you were saying about how historically, and actually I say historically, but really not very long ago, and still in some places now, it is treated like a mental illness. That
Yeah.
is to me more indicative of the laziness of
Mhm.
society rather than like a
Yeah.
misunderstanding. Like nobody really even bothered to learn. It was just
Right.
like, no, we have our restrictions and this is how gender works. And if you don't fit into that,
Mm.
then there's something wrong with you. Rather than like, oh, that's interesting that
Yeah.
we have these rules and there are some people outside of that.
Yeah.
It's just pure laziness,
No.
in my mind, at least.
Yeah, it's so true. And if I think about, back when I transitioned or came out for the first time, I was diagnosed with gender identity disorder. Like, what?
Really?
Yeah, yeah, the OG designation or diagnosis. Right now, it's gender dysphoria, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Having
yeah.
a difference between one's gender identity and social roles or body, and trying to, with various measures, various options, address that
Mm.
discomfort or distress. But back in the day, it was a disorder. Yeah, and that felt really not great, right? Because I'm
No.
coming to this very exciting, having pieced it together over many years, and suddenly I get this label slapped on me, and I'm like, ugh,
Right.
like it's
But it
not a
feels like
disorder.
it feels like you're being told there's something wrong with you rather
Hmm.
than just, oh, this is an interesting thing about me.
Yeah,
That's such a wild thought,
I
but
know. Yeah, and
but
that's from kind of a more pathological approach, right?
mm,
And for many, it's like, okay, let's jump through the hoops of whatever the medical system is set up to be able to
right.
get to what we need, right? But so we do it, but it doesn't feel great along the way, especially with all these types of things that kind of either subtle or very obvious, like
Hmm.
something wrong with you, or the matter that we have to, like, I don't know, correct for somehow. Yeah, so it's just kind of baked
Yeah.
in to the system, like, already.
Hmm. Let's say you've found out, you've discovered that somebody is trans. They've told you, they've shared this information with you, and often when people meet trans people,
Hmm.
um, they are the first trans person they've met, or they
Hmm.
maybe will only meet like a handful of trans people in their whole lives. And so it can be a bit, um, I don't know, is exciting the right word? Or like there's just a lot of curiosity around it.
Hmm.
Is that is that
Yeah,
fair to say that
yeah, yeah.
you can be met with a lot of interest
Hmm.
around this? And that can sometimes, because of people's interests, can lead people to be a bit blasé with
Hmm.
this information, and they can be sort of, maybe it comes from a good place, so they're sort of excited to talk about it, but
Yeah.
end up kind of telling other people like, oh,
Hmm.
Kai's trans, or
Yeah.
talking about this topic with other people. Maybe it's seen as like something a bit just like free to talk about, but it's actually super private for a lot of people. And so I was
Right.
wondering if you could go into that aspect about how um, privacy is really
Mm.
key when it comes to
Mhm.
this.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true, and it stems from, or what I imagine, and I'm always curious to hear from other folks if there's a different way of looking at this, but I think for many cisgender people, their gender is public, right? It's
Right.
largely in their minds visible, right? You can see, I look feminine, I look masculine, and people can make assumptions based on that to what their gender identity is. And so there's a bit more, kind of like you were saying, a bit more casual around it, right?
Hmm.
And we often, share that information. Oh, or it's the first thing we kind of share about somebody. She's a woman that does X, Y, and Z, or like we kind of
Right.
forefront that information sometimes even. However, with trans and non-binary folks, because there's still quite a bit of stigma um, against trans and non-binary folks in society, or
Hmm.
just so many misunderstandings, or difficulties that folks are navigating, there can be a bit more caution. Of course, this is not
Yeah.
everyone. Some people are really excited and want to talk and are okay with sharing, like all of that. So I don't want to just say everyone is like this, but
Hmm.
I would say there is more caution. And as a result, sharing whether one is trans or non-binary is more of a private matter, right?
Hmm.
What somebody's identity is important to them, but not necessarily something that everyone needs to know. or is chosen on a case-by-case basis, based on trust or some degree or sense of safety with a person or within an organization. So that's where there is a bit of a cultural shift for cisgender people to be cognizant of these considerations, a bit of a calculus that trans and non-binary folks are often kind of real-time doing a lot of the time is to figure out, right? Even when I meet new people, of course, I'm like very out. And like, it's part of
Yes.
my job. And if I email anybody with, it's at transfocus.ca, right? Like, so, so there's all this. I am out. However, when I meet a new person, I don't immediately, say what I do. I might have a few layers to how I share what I do, right? I might
Mhm.
say I do equity, diversity, and inclusion work, right? Does like a broad statement. If I go across the border, that's what I'm saying, right? Like, I'm
Right.
not getting
Yeah.
into me being trans, right? So, because my job title can often automatically, at least people presume, right? Which probably is a pretty
Mhm.
safe assumption. All that to say is that there's a lot for trans people, and so it's really important. Counter to the misconception is that this can be a private thing for folks, and to be a bit more sensitive to that. And if you're thinking of wanting to share, the most common one I hear is, used to be Tom is now Tanya vibes, right?
Oh, yikes.
So people are maybe not even saying it outright, but people can
Right.
piece it together by the difference between those two names and how
Mm.
society usually names folks based on those genders, right? So it's important not to be as cavalier, even if for you as a cisgender person, it's like no big deal. But
Mhm.
for many trans and non-binary folks, it is a big deal, and we want to allow them to do their own safety assessment because
Right.
they've probably figured out what works for them and
Mhm.
how they want to navigate it. So yeah.
It's something that it's like, for me, my gender has always felt very intimate and very private.
Mm,
And even though not really, because I'm talking
mm,
about it on a podcast all the time, but
right.
there's something about it that feels very, very intimate
Mm,
about, like, maybe it's just the discussion of it that, yeah, I don't love the idea of it being chatted about.
right.
I don't know. It's
When
such
you're
an
not
odd
there.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I don't know. It feels odd to have someone have an opinion about it.
Mm,
Like I don't know. It just feels very private.
mhm.
So yeah, it's odd um, to think about that. One of the misconceptions that comes up a lot is I can tell who's trans
Mm.
just by looking at them. This comes
Ooh.
up so much,
Ooh,
and
ooh,
maybe
ooh.
that's, I don't know if you've seen a lot of that in Transfocus's work, but it's
Mm.
something that I see a lot with my work in Transfocus on
Yeah.
social media.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I was wondering if you could go into that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanna split this into, kind of a malicious approach and a kind of benevolent or positive approach to this, when people say this kind of thing, because I don't think everybody's, out to get trans and non-binary folks.
Right.
But for
Yes.
the kind of more benevolent side of things, what typically people think, especially cisgender folks, they're like, okay, I will change my things based on seeing someone trans. Uh, so they'll adjust
Right.
things only when they think they're seeing a trans person. And they think that they'll be able to identify every single trans person and be able to
Mm,
adapt accordingly. Because when we get requests for education, that's the kind of perspective that people are coming from. They're like, okay, tell
right.
us what to do if we see a trans person. But the kind of thing beneath it is that they think they'll know when they
Hmm.
see a trans person, right? So it's just kind of, it's a bit tricky. And I think because many people, myself included, are very visual. So we're like, okay, we'll be able to categorize based on how somebody looks. We just that's our pattern. We're going to keep going with it. It's a good
Hmm.
thing, right? And I'm actually, when we do education, it's actually going a little bit deeper than that to say that actually you probably won't be able to identify. In fact, we have stats to
Hmm.
say that the majority of trans people report that people don't know that they're trans, right? It's 56%. And so, it's like slight majority, and so it's not always visible or obvious. And so that's where you have to have a different strategy that isn't kind of based on looks. And in doing so, we prevent missing some people, and we also make sure we handle folks that we do know. So there's the benevolent side of things, but there's also the malicious. And here it becomes more harmful, where people online or just out and about in life think that they'll be able to identify trans people. And then, usually it's kind of in relation to washrooms, and will then say, oh, okay, then I can handle the situation, right? And
Right.
essentially, in their minds, boot trans people out of washrooms. That's their kind of modus operandi, where they're thinking that they'll be able to. And certainly, in some instances, people can. There are visibly trans folks, and then there is harm that is. When people kick out or make comment or make some big issue of a trans person in a washroom, um, but there's also the other side of it where people misidentify someone as trans and they're actually cis, usually a cis woman that looks more masculine, and suddenly they're also booting them out of the washrooms as well, right? So it has this harmful impact of like, oh, I think I know, or I can know anyone that's trans based on how they look, is actually harming a larger group of people than just trans people in this instance. So whether it's the benevolent side or the malicious side, all of it doesn't work based on looks alone.
Right.
And so the key message here is to shift to something other than that, especially when we're thinking about interacting with one another. We will only know if that person tells us what their gender
Right.
is.
This is something that we get on social media, and one that kind of has made me laugh in the past is
Mm,
we sometimes get on our podcast clips of you and I speaking,
mm,
we'll get comments of people sort of trying to, I think the intention is to upset, like they'll be
right.
sort of intentionally provocative with
Mm,
the words that they're writing.
mm,
And one that we get quite a lot is
mm,
just two guys talking,
mm.
like they look at us, you and I speaking, and are sort of like, oh, it's two men speaking.
Right.
The point that they're making is that I am a trans woman. I think that's what they're getting at, and
Right.
that you are a cis man.
Oh,
And so that they have missed,
mm,
like they're trying to say like we can always tell, but
right.
have missed it entirely and are exactly proving this point that you can't tell. And the
Right.
assumption is that, one, that trans women aren't real women, but
Yes.
also that I'm a trans woman, which I'm not, but
Right.
isn't an insult anyway. And
Right.
then also sort of categorizing me as therefore what they would say biologically male, and
Mm,
then looking at you as a cis guy.
mhm.
And it's just fascinating to me
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
the point went so far over their head.
Right. Right.
It
Yeah.
comes up surprisingly often.
Huh.
We'll get that.
Wow. Yeah. People wanna, like, call out the realness, in their mind
Yeah,
realness, right? But
right.
then, are off, very, very off in some instances, and sometimes can be inadvertently affirming towards trans
Right.
and non.
We have had comments of like of you,
Mm.
like you'll never be a woman, and it's like right, agreed.
Excellent. Done.
Yeah.
That is accurate.
Yeah.
I love it. And that's what you
That,
call an accidental ally.
yeah. With that, just that I can tell who's trans just by looking at them, or
Mm,
like, people kind of making these assumptions about how people should look, how trans people should look. There is this a few things then within that, and one of them is that trans people should pass
mm,
as cisgender in order
right.
to be valid, and
Mm,
also within that is even the aim of
mm,
trans people,
mhm,
or some trans people. So I was wondering if you could go into that too.
yeah. Ooh, that's a big one.
Hmm.
So people in at least in society, we have a very strong notion that somebody's gender identity, how they feel internally, or know their gender, versus how they express themselves, gender expression, what they look on the outside. And those in our minds need to be aligned, or in society, I would say. Um, so if you're a man, you should act or present in masculine ways. If you're a woman, you should be, feminine. And for non-binary folks, there's always this weird one around you should be androgynous, right? So
Yeah.
just like you got to map, properly here according to
Right.
society. Chop chop. And that is not the case for everyone. That might be the case for some, and that's great if that's authentic, cool. But then there's a lot of pressure or expectations or comments, stares for the people who don't, whose gender identity doesn't align with their gender expression and can invalidate them, right? So when I first came out, I was like not interested in, I was interested in like, still wearing kind of floral themed clothing. And that was like a big moment. And I was like, what? Like some people even questioning why I wanted to transition if I didn't, want to be completely masculine. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
That's bananas, right? Like
Yeah.
these are two separate matters, how I relate to my body versus how I express myself, right? Or at least I hope we get to a society that has more space for this, rich diversity that exists, and not like really pressuring and forcing things upon people that aren't authentic. So that means, women are going to be more masculine, and that's whether they're trans or
Right.
cisgender, right? Like this is not just a matter for trans folks, although it's disproportionately impacts trans folks. And so this kind of insistence is very pernicious and very difficult to manage for somebody to want to show up authentically, whether in the workplace or in their personal lives.
And then on that, sort of looking at beauty standards, and one of the things that's very common is the opinion that trans women can't be
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. And what does that even mean? And also, um, just ew. What am I trying to say? Can you answer that?
I like that. It's just ew. I mean, that's pretty much all that needs to be said about it.
Right.
In some respects, people can have an incredulous response to a beautiful trans woman, right? Just like, holy
Right.
crap, that exists. Like, I didn't even factor that into my worldview, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then also, kind of similar to this notion of passing, right? To be
Mm-hmm.
more cisgender like, that then you'll be accepted is also gross, right? And we don't
Mm-hmm.
want to have people need to do that in order to be considered valid, right? So
Right.
yes, there are trans women that are beautiful, and there are also folks that don't align, nor do they want to necessarily, with
Mm-hmm.
those types of standards, right?
Right.
They love themselves for how they look, what they, um, and maybe some want to live up to those standards, but for whatever reason aren't able to, and that is
Mm-hmm.
also a difficult path for them to navigate. And so just kind of relaxing on those for everyone's
Right.
benefit can really
Mm-hmm.
go a long way, to making everybody's lives more like just easier to live, no matter which kind of lane one finds oneself in.
Mm-hmm.
That can really open things up, and we can celebrate the beautiful diversity that exists rather than like continuously hammering in people into very tight spaces that don't fit everything that
Mm-hmm.
they are.
Mm-hmm. It's just so like this affects beyond, as with all of this actually, that so many more people are affected by this than
Yeah.
trans and non-binary people. But if we could all just relax our, because the
Mm.
beauty standards that we have are so, focused heavily on cis people. They're also focused heavily on white people. They're also
Yeah.
so heavily focused on, X, Y, and Z type of person that you
Mm.
should all aspire to be. And if you're not that, then therefore you're not beautiful. It's just such nonsense. And
Yeah.
I think we could all do with letting that go a little bit.
Yeah. Overhaul.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, expanding the scope of what is beautiful, which there's
Mm-hmm.
so much beauty. It's just we can't see it, or at least not by societal standards. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. We've mentioned washrooms previously, and so like earlier in this episode, but also many episodes, I think we've talked about washrooms.
Mhm.
But one of the misconceptions or the ideas is that trans people should have their own washrooms, or
Mm.
sort of go in either the washroom that is assigned to the, like matching their sex assigned at birth,
Mhm.
or that they should have their own special washroom for special trans people. You can go in
Ooh,
there. And
have a
I
party.
was wondering, right? Yeah. I was wondering if you could go into that and sort of address that, because it's pretty common. I
Yeah.
imagine you see that a lot of work.
Oh, yeah. In fact, sometimes I hear when people describe single unit washroom, they call it a trans bathroom. And
Right.
often will redirect folks actively to that to say, you don't come into the men's and women's because you've got your own, right? And
Right.
that's where you should go. So there's like, it's really active policing of folks. And again, it doesn't just impact trans folks, it's also cisgender women, particularly.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this concept that there's a trans bathroom, or that there ought to be one, as well as the solution for all these things that we're wrestling with. And it's that kind of separate but equal approach, right?
Yeah.
And it's not to say that some trans and non-binary folks want to use a single unit washroom, of which, of course, please make that available for folks, right? So I don't want to discount the single unit washroom, but if that's the only washroom that we're directing folks, trans folks, to, there's a problem, because that, of course, that is not what everybody wants to or thinks where their proper place is. So yeah, if it's something you force on everyone, it does actually, in effect, out them as transgender. If
Right.
there's one place that trans people ought to go, and that does not solve the problem, that in fact puts a bullseye on trans people to be
Mm-hmm.
further harmed in the ways that they are in other places, right? Like, you can
Mm-hmm.
pretty much target trans people if that's how the washrooms were set up, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that could create more violence. There's already a lot of violence, and then there would be more. So that is
Mm-hmm.
not actually a viable solution. And again, not to say we do need single unit washrooms, right? That is an important option, but it is an option among many. And the other one, I'm trying to remember what, oh yeah, based on sex assignment. So then people, and certainly also being inscribed in law down in the United States and certain states, where it is based on sex at birth. And some people think that that's like an easy solution, right? To clarify, it's just based on your body and that's it, done.
Mm-hmm.
However, that doesn't solve the issues, because if it's based on sex assignment, I'm going into the women's washroom where people would properly identify me as a man coming into the women's washroom, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it actually doesn't change things. You're still going to have masculine looking people coming into those washrooms, if it's based on sex assignment. So for me, there's a larger issue of like, how do we handle safety, and how do we
Yeah.
determine that, and how do we implement that, rather than being really hyper focused on looks and bodies, right? Because that's not going to solve the issues.
Right.
And so, and I don't think people think that through. They're just like, okay, bodies are easy, we'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes a layer further, because okay, are you going to have somebody at the door checking IDs, right? In which
Right.
case, my ID has male on it. So how's that going to solve the problem? So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
are you going to do it based on sex assigned at birth and carry around my birth certificate, which also has been updated? It's just like, is it based on what people's current sex characteristics? Like, it's just like it's very, gets very tricky very quickly in ways that
Mm-hmm.
people maybe haven't thought through. So the easier approach, one that we have in here in Canada, is it's based on gender identity, self-determined, no need for IDs or changes or anything. It's just like, you are who you say you are. And
Mm-hmm.
then if there are safety issues to handle, they're based on behavior. People are
Mm-hmm.
like, we know when something's unsafe because of how somebody's acting, um,
Right.
staring, lurking, taking photos. Like, all of these we know are inappropriate for washrooms and
Mm-hmm.
change rooms. and then we deal with them on that basis.
Mm-hmm. And that's across the board, regardless of whether you're cis or trans. Yeah,
And
any
everyone,
behavior.
yeah. And, it's like, I don't think any gender is exempt. Like, there are going to be some people of any gender that there are going to be problems, and you would want to be able to identify them properly. But of course, the majority of trans and non-binary and cisgender folk are not causing problems.
Right. Yeah. So another misconception is that they them pronouns are grammatically incorrect. And I was wondering if you could go into that too.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So the singular use of they them, as opposed to the plural use. So we're all used to using they for a group of people, but then people really struggle when it's for one person. And that's where they're like, whoa, wait a second. Pump the brakes.
Right.
There's two things I'll say about it. One, we do in our common discourse, whether we realize it or not, we are actually already use singular use of they them for people that we don't know. It's like a stand-in. It's like, I don't know, this person's left their pen. I hope they come back and get it. Like, we don't even think about it. We're just already primed. So we're already using it. And then secondly, it has been in use in the English language at different parts. Probably, less so in the last little bit, but certainly in the past, more commonly. And so we kind of wax in and out of the multiple uses of this pronoun for different numbers of people. And so back in Shakespearean time, it was a very common use, and perhaps fell out of use for a while, and now it's back, right? So, but it is actually grammatically correct from a linguistic standpoint. And sometimes people create such a big hubbubaloo that people choose other pronouns because of it. So it's actually quite harmful to say that. Um, and if people think it, I mean, sure, then maybe just go and explore that a bit more to have a better understanding. But the thing is that we already use it, and we're just now not using it for trans and non-binary folks, and that feels like a little bit more targeted maliciousness. So
yeah, 100%. This one, the next misconception, and it's the last one that we have written down, but I don't know how to sort of segue into it, so I'm just gonna jump in again, which is the one that you mentioned in the intro. One of the ones that you mentioned in the intro as well is that it's about how so much of the focus of trans issues tends to be on trans women, and there is this sort of kind of not necessarily ignoring, but just like dismissal of trans men and even like their abilities. And I mean, actually, I'm going to let you, I was going to say something. I was going to go on a whole thing about how rooted in misogyny that is. But this idea that trans men can't be good at things, especially when it comes to things like sports. It's like the focus is trans women are threatening women's sports, but the conversation around trans men is just like non-existent almost. And so, yeah, I was wondering if you, well, I'm sure you do have thoughts on it, but if you could go into that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And of course, personally, I find it fascinating as a trans man myself, right? And I think that commonly happens where there's a hyper focus on one end of the spectrum versus the other, and kind of on different topics. This one related to sport, there's like this over focus on trans women, which I think is not properly placed. Is actually not as much of a threat as people think or their initial hunch is. But then the counterpart of that is that trans men are largely invisible, or like not even thought of as contenders within sport, at like high levels, right? Maybe rec beer league, but not like, oh wow, I got to watch out for this competitor in my field. And it's something that one of the more prominent trans men athletes, Chris Mosier, talks about a lot. And it's just like, this is a guy that went to the Olympics, right? and
Right.
for the U.S.
Yeah.
team as a triathlete. And so it's just like either not knowing, discounting, or sometimes even oddly enough thinking he's a trans woman. Like people just can't conceive of trans men being a competitive contender. Um,
Right.
and I think that also unlocks some of the discourse, is that they are contenders. And so there is an influence of, whether it's hormones or whatever choices people make for themselves with gender affirming care, those actually do have an impact on competitiveness. And so if we're each following the guidelines of whatever governing body, it does translate to being comparable to whether cisgender men or cisgender women. And I think that's where people get stuck, is they don't think that there's anything that can change when it can.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
where I found that personally to be the case, I used to be with the Vancouver Frontrunners, and once I started taking testosterone, that did really help out a lot. And
Did it really?
yeah, yeah. And so I did actually start beating some of my cisgender pals, and they were a bit flabbergasted. Some of them were really gracious and are like, yeah, this is cool. But others are like, what?
Yeah.
To the point where they said I was cheating, and like sometimes jokingly, but I
Okay.
think,
Oh, I took that seriously then. I was like, oh
well,
my gosh.
when sometimes there's joking, and then it could be like,
There's
that
like the truth
also
inside the
feels
joke.
a little
Yeah.
bit like and then I was
Right.
like, no, what was the case is before I came out, and that was the kind of more compromised position for me, right?
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
when I fully became myself, then I'm actually competing as a peer with you.
Hmm.
And so that's where the testosterone is key. Like, I'm not a testosterone-less man, right? Like why would you expect that of someone? So it was
Right.
very bizarre, and really interesting, this kind of these misconceptions around trans men in sport. And I think those could be actually helpful to hoping, at least in my mind, hopefully taking a bit of the pressure off of, or a lot of the pressure off of trans women. Because
Hmm.
I mean, now we have studies that are coming out to show that after, I think it's 1 year or 2 years, I'd have to go back to the study, their levels are comparable to that of cisgender
Hmm.
women, or comparable competitive. Anyways, of course, that's a deeper matter, lots to
Right.
unpack, and there's variation across sport that I want to acknowledge. But all this to say that, trans men have something to offer in
Right.
competition, and, watch out, cis guys. Just kidding.
There was that boxer like a couple of years
Oh,
ago
right.
that
Yes.
that won, right? This the trans guy that
Oh, what was his name?
won. I
I
can't
was
remember his name.
following him for a while. We'll put it in the show notes in case people are
Mhm.
interested. But yeah, there's a few, like a handful of examples. Some of them may not be fully visible to us, because of course not everybody wants to be out in sport at this
Mhm.
time when it's like a bit bananas, because there's a lot of spotlighting that happens. So I think that's a part of it. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. With I know there's a misogyny aspect to it, so I don't know if you
Oh
wanted to
gosh.
speak to that.
Let me get on my
Clear my throat.
yeah. Well, I just think that the it's all kind of rooted in, for me, or this is my understanding of it, is that women are bad at sports, and
Mm,
therefore a trans guy is not a real guy and therefore is bad at sport. There's this whole kind of intertwining of that,
mm,
dismissal of women's
mm,
achievements and sports,
mm.
and therefore the misogyny and also transphobia are rooted in the dismissal of trans men in sports too. Without,
Oof.
I could talk about this could be like 10 podcasts for me, but
Okay.
that's the root of it. That, in my mind at least,
Oh
or is a
yeah.
big part of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Is and even the protectionistic inclinations have that vibe in there. It's like we got
Yeah.
the kind of tender, very fragile beings need to be protected. And then yeah, of
Right.
course, trans men get lumped into that as well, right? So it's like,
Hmm.
ooh, yeah, there's a
Yeah.
larger thing at play for sure.
Yeah, I think so. Just especially, and the way that roots into also when it comes to trans women and racism, and just the sort of idea that women are fragile and a little bit rubbish at sports, and then you get like it's not reflective. And we've actually seen, like, I don't know if you've seen this, but recently the Olympics are considering banning trans women from sports and also cisgender women with male levels of testosterone. And it's like, that's crazy. That really, what is that saying? And the way that we have such a narrow view of what it is to be a woman, and therefore extend that into the way we treat trans men too, because of this like disbelief that they are men. And I just feel like it goes on and on and on, and there's so many layers to that.
Yeah. The sports one in particular is there's so much to it, but it's bananas because even just from a hormonal perspective, especially with high performing athletes, there's those bell curves and they're overlapping between across the gender spectrum, right? So I'm just like, yeah, good luck trying to lop out a pretty significant portion of women in sport.
Well, we've gone over, like, everything that we've talked about has been sort of like skimming the surface of these, and I imagine that we do have some full episodes on these topics, or on some of these topics as well. And we could definitely go into some of these topics in a bigger detail, the ones that we haven't recorded. So I can link those episodes in the show notes too. But do you have anything else you wanted to add on this, or if there are any misconceptions we've missed? Or, I mean, there are there are misconceptions that we haven't covered. There's so many, but any ones that you want to touch on now?
Yeah, I just in closing, I appreciate there's a lot of misconceptions, and for some listeners who are cisgender, it might feel a bit daunting, right? Just be like, holy crap, and maybe there's so much to unpack, and maybe I don't know all the misconceptions, and so maybe I should just study this and hold back. And so not wanting to make people scared on this topic, I mean, it's good to think about the ones that we've raised if they're new to you, to think them through, to kind of thoughtfully consider them. But of course, if you don't know, then at some point somebody will share, right? And so not to be too afraid of going forward and continuing to be an active ally and whatnot. So because people or maybe you'll learn along the way if you watch YouTube videos or podcasts or listen to podcasts like this, you'll learn along the way. So not to be kind of, hopefully this is not kind of dissuading anybody from continuing on their journey. And it's okay. It's not a personal thing. It's not some personal failing on your part to have these misconceptions. They're deeply baked in our society, and so it's more of a systemic thing. Obviously, we undo systemic things by our individual actions, so that is important. But yeah, hopefully it's not something that you kind of bear personally, that we're just a part of a society that has thought this for a while, and so it's just one step at a time undoing that.
Great. Thank you so much, Kai.
Yeah, thank you. This was great to work through at lightning speed, and perhaps other episodes will deepen some of those thoughts. So anyways, goodbye for now.
Cool. See you. Bye.